Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. Well, my episode yesterday got a pretty positive response, and for quite some time, I've been meaning to read through the Bible. Not that I haven't done it before, I just haven't done it online. And start looking at the text, the implications, and the significance, what people found important between 3,000 and 2,000 years ago, and what we can learn from it today. And most importantly, how to differentiate between what people tell us and what is actually in the book. Let me clarify some things to start with. I'm not a biblical literalist. I read the text. I have an appreciation for the text. But while I believe it was an inspired work, I do not believe God sat down and wrote it and handed it to people. There's far too much evidence of the human hand in this. It's still worth going through because of its cultural significance. So today, we're just going to go through Genesis 1 and 2. That's it, just Genesis 1 and 2. Excuse me while I get my Bible reading voice. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. When God began to create heaven and the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it might separate water from water." God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gatherings of the waters he called seas. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed on it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. Third day is a killer for a God. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night, and they shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years." Oh, sorry, I think I skipped something there. No, that's right. No. "And they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, and to dominate the day and night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day. God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures." Hang on, I'm just getting my book settled. God said, "Let waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." God created the great sea monsters, and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile, fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. God said, see, I have given you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every thing that creeps on the earth. Oh, sorry. Let me try that again. God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, where there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. The heaven and earth were finished, all in their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work he had been doing, and he ceased on the seventh day from the work he had done. And God blessed the seventh day, and he declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all work of creation that he had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. Very enchanting story, full of symbolism, full of meaning. But let's try to put ourselves into the mindset of 3,000 years, even possibly 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, because a lot of this was taken, not stolen, but taken from earlier traditions. Just a quick scan over this shows a couple interesting things. First of all, the whole water incident. He separates the water from below the sky and above the sky. Some people take this exact verse to represent that Earth is flat, and I don't believe that is so. We know from modern astronomical measurements that there is water in the sky. As a matter of fact, we used to think everything up there was a desert, which is one of the reasons science fiction films tend to feature desert planets. But the more we look, we found water on the moon. We found water in the asteroids. We found water on Mars. We're finding it on the moons of Jupiter. Water everywhere. So if you want to be a biblical literalist, you don't have to be a flat earther. And that's a nice thing. Look at the data, and that's going to show you exactly where you need to be. We don't ask you to be blind when you read the Bible. Just keep in mind that nothing it says is necessarily contradictory. Then it kind of goes through all the, he invented this, he caused to come into creation this, and he declares everything good. But one of the interesting things, hang on, I'm just trying to find it while I'm talking here, the sea monsters. Remember that? The sea monsters. Well, again, you got to put yourself into the mentality of 4,000, 3,000 years ago. If you saw a manatee or a great whale or something like that, they would be monsters for you. Most people would be familiar with alligators and sharks in the Fertile Crescent because they had them in Mesopotamia, they had them in Egypt. So the ancient Israelites, both in their time in Israel, wandering about, and in their time as exiles in Babylon, would have heard tons of interesting stories about what they found in the sea. So the Bible, once again, is reflecting reality. Does that mean there is a Leviathan out there? Not necessarily, although in Job it talks about the battle between God and Rahab, which is a watery serpent of some description. There's several creation myths in the Bible. We're just going to keep with this one for now on. And there, at the very end, it says, chapter 2, verse 1, paragraph 4, such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. Except it isn't. Genesis chapter 2, verse 5. Let's start again. When the Lord God made heaven and earth, and when no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil, but a flow would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living thing. I'm going to pause right here. This is the dead opposite of the other creation myth. Water just flows over the earth and comes back. It's almost like a tide that would sweep forth, and it seems to imply it's a relatively frequent thing. Gone are the days of creation. That's another creation myth. This is a new creation myth where God starts off with man. That's a weird choice. The original God decided that he was going to create animals and stuff like that, and here he says, nope, we're starting with man. Okay, it's kind of like building a 747 when you don't have passengers, but we're not going to question the good book at this point. We'll question it later. Genesis chapter 2, verse 8. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden. Oh, now we're starting to get into familiar territory. In the east, and placed there the man who he had formed. And from the ground the Lord God caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge from good and bad. I think you guys know how this story ends. A river issues from Eden to water the garden, and it divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon, the name that winds through the whole land of Havilah, where the gold is. The gold of that land is good, bdellium is there, and lapis lazuli. The name of the second river is Gihon, the one that winds through the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, however you want to say it, the one that flows east of Ashur, and the fourth river is the Euphrates. The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden, and to till it and tend it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of the tree of the garden you are free to eat. But as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you will die. And the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him. And the Lord God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that would be its name. And man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to the wild beasts. And but for Adam, no fitting helper was found. So the Lord God cast a deep sleep upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that spot. And the Lord God fashioned the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman. And he brought her to the man, and the man said, this at last is one of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for from man she was taken. Hence a man leaves his mother and clings to his wife, so that they become one flesh. I'm going to leave it off at Genesis chapter 3 there, because we start to get into some interesting things. Now let's compare the two stories. The first story is very structured. It's kind of like a good recipe for creating universe. First start with light, because you need light for photosynthesis and all the life processes that we know. The second one comes across more as a morality tale, where man is special in the universe. Instead of being the last thing created, he is the first one created. Again, kind of a mirror image. But the most interesting thing is that the second story, God is a single unified entity. Whereas in the first story, and I purposely skipped this earlier, God said, let us create man in our image. Who is he talking to in that section? It's very peculiar. He never talks to anybody else in the first section, or in the second section, but in the first one, he is absolutely speaking to other people. Whether they're his angels, whether they're some sort of other deities. So right away with the two creation stories, you see that one was created, well, one comes from an older myth where there were multiple entities that were available for God to speak to. And in the second one, it's a political statement. Man is formed first, and woman is formed to serve him. I've always wondered what would have happened if the first story had been the one that made it to the modern age. Instead, it's kind of buried in there between chapter 1 and chapter 2.1. But whereas if that had been what the religion had been based on, I don't know, it's just one of those weird things about the Bible. You have two stories back to back, next to each other, that have completely different orders of operations. There's no Garden of Eden in the first story. Just things happen. First story, God says, first day, we're going to have light. Second day, we're going to have water. Third day, blah, blah, blah. And the second one, God says, we're going to have man. And then he thinks, I better build a garden. Can you imagine that poor man there on the earth looking around at absolute devastation? At least this is how the text is written. And the rivers that are mentioned in the second creation, we don't really know where Pishon is. We have some theories. That's the first river. The second one is Gihon, and that was in the land of Cush. Well, Cush seems to be south of Egypt, but over a few thousand years, place names change. Just look at Avalon, the Shakespeare. We're not 100% sure where he was from. Avon, Avalon, all these words, they can change within a matter of a couple hundred years. Heck, where I grew up was called Buffy's Corners for about 200 years, and then it was called Brampton. It does not take long to change a name. The third river is the Tigris, and the fourth river are the Euphrates. These are rivers we are very familiar with, and they are in Mesopotamia. So look at a map. Cush, Mesopotamia, these places are all over the place. And a place with gold, lapis lazuli, and bdellium, that's Egypt. They had all those things. They used them in a lot of their artifacts, everything that they used. That was their luxury, to be honest. But anyways, just a reading of the Bible, introduce some of the interesting things. I am going to have to skip certain parts of Genesis because, like, the genealogy trees and stuff like that. I might go over a couple of them, but mostly they're just in there to show connections between one patriarch and the next. And if you expand it long enough, they prove that Jesus belongs to the house of Judah. That's something, I'm not going to draw out charts and figure that out. That's been done before. But just listen to those first two chapters of the Bible about the creation of the earth. And it's phenomenal how different they are. So if we can see, the Bible is a blend. It's got a couple different traditions in it. And it's important to remember that going forward, because not everything was composed by a couple monks sitting in a cave and saying, hey, we need to have a creation mythology. There are links back to the very beginning of writing, the very beginning of literature. And this is one of the things that has been really hard for people who study the Bible to tease out. We figure there's at least 4 authors for the Old Testament, well, for the first 5 books. And then it becomes even more when you start getting named books. There are all sorts of writers. And then you get into the problem in the ancient world where you get pseudo-writers, where one person would write in the style of another. So that would be like, for me, in the modern age, I would write in Stephen King's style. But in the ancient world, we would accredit it to Stephen King because we'd be honoring him. And this is one of those weird things about ancient times. It doesn't translate well to modern times, where we guard our intellectual property very fiercely. But that'll be something we can go over another day. So Genesis 1 and 2. We've already got some exciting contradictions. We've got some really interesting things to talk about, like the water below the heavens, the seas, and the water above the heavens being that of the planets. We wish to thank you for joining us on the Silverlight Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit like, subscribe, buy the merchandise, and we hope you have a fantastic day.